Well, I'll get started. Good morning, everybody. I am Sheila Maroney, and I'm the Executive Director for the Patient Revolution. And I want to welcome you all to this town hall. And we're lucky to have Allison Pugh with us this morning. And Victor is going to be doing a proper introduction, but I just want to say thank you to Allison for joining us and sharing her wisdom with the group. I also want to introduce the rest of the Patient Revolution team that is on the call. Maggie Breslin is here. She is our director, creative and program director, and has been largely responsible for making this event happen today. I'd like to introduce Sheila Daly, who helps support us administratively in all ways, keeping the trains running on time and keeping us all moving forward with wonderful support. And Kristen Hutchinson, who is our program coordinator, who also has contributed to helping make this a great event. You'll hear from Victor in a moment. I can't see everybody, so I might miss somebody, but I do see Len Berry has joined us. Len is a new board member of the Patient Revolution, so we're thrilled to have our leadership join us this morning as well. It's really indicative of the kind of community that we try to create here. And I think for those of you who have not participated in a Patient Revolution event before, this is a sort of a hallmark of ours, which is gathering people from all healthcare perspectives from all over the United States and the world. We have about 3,000 constituents hailing from 28 countries, representing patient experiences, clinician experiences, educators, policymakers, healthcare administrators, recovering healthcare administrators. That's the bucket that I'm in. We have lots and lots of wonderful perspectives and ideas and inspiration on this call, as well as in our larger community. I welcome and invite you all to check out our website. Again, if you haven't been involved with us before, we have lots to offer for people who are looking for a community of like-minded people who know that healthcare needs to change, who are looking for some hope, and who have ideas about how we can collectively turn away from industrialized healthcare and turn towards the environments and creating environments that support and nurture careful and kind care for all. So that is our mission and vision in a very short few sentences. One of the hallmarks of what we do is, again, teach and inspire people through events like this town hall. And also, I'm going to put in a plug for an upcoming program we have called Foundations of Care. We offer it about 6 times a year. It's a virtual opportunity to immerse yourself in the framework of the patient revolution, into exploring what does industrialized healthcare look like, what is careful and kind care, and how might you use your circle of influence to affect change. And in the chat will be a link to our upcoming cohort, which starts on June 2nd. It's a wonderful, wonderful learning experience. And again, creates an opportunity for you to learn from others who may not be in your exact discipline or may have had different lived and professional experiences. So we welcome you all into that cohort and keep an eye open for future cohorts if that particular one doesn't work. So with that, again, I'm thrilled that you're all here. Thank you for spending a little bit of your morning with us, or afternoon or evening, wherever you may be. And I'll turn it over to Victor.
Thanks, Sheila. Victor Montori over here in the group room with my colleagues at the Knowledge and Evaluation Research Unit at Mayo Clinic. This is a research unit focused on encounter research and the uncovering the science of caring. And it is my pleasure to collaborate with Sheila and Patient Revolution on this town hall meeting, and to welcome Professor Allison Pugh to our group, and to invite her to give a brief presentation to us and then engage in conversation with this community. Professor Pugh is at Johns Hopkins University, and also is the vice president of the American Sociological Association. Her background is incredibly diverse. From having founded a school and being a U.S. diplomat in Honduras, and uh, uh, you can read on AllisonPugh.com her complete bio. But what struck me, and I think matters tremendously to understand her scholarship, is her background in journalism and her experience in journalism. In that, not only does that uh, uh, connect with her knack for making her interviewers comfortable and being able to reveal issues as part of her ethnographic work, but also to make for a great storyteller, a great communicator of science. And her multiple books, not just The Last Human Job, which is the one that motivated us, our connection and this presentation, but her prior books as well, and her writings as a journalist before that, indicate a phenomenal communicator. So she's a great interviewer, she's a great communicator, and as a result of that, she's able to connect with the people that are contributing insights into her scholarship. And it is that connection that is at the core of her scholarship. And in this case, it's the work of connective labor, the term that she's used to describe what chaplains and psychologists and therapists and teachers and nurses and physicians and other groups do, in which there's bidirectional interaction, emotional recognition, and mattering of each other as they engage in that work. She'll tell us more about this today. And one of the things that we were particularly taken about her account is, first of all, I think it connects very much with the basics of the account that motivates the work at Patient Revolution, a work that is trying to make sure that care, that connective labor remains at the center of healthcare and healthcare organizations and all sorts of things, but also her work of figuring out how is it that these organizations, this sort of systematic context enables or hinders the ability of people to connect. And as AI enters this space, how is it that it catches us somewhat unaware and unprepared about what is care? And like Johnny Mitchell will do, are we ready to not know something that is important until it's gone? And I think she raises this alarm in her book as we have AI and the capabilities of AI beginning to define for us what that connective labor is, instead of us having a clear understanding that I think her scholarship and her book make massive contributions to. So I'll stop at this point and invite Professor Pugh. The floor is yours, and thank you again from all of us and from everyone in our community for your time and for writing this book and for joining us today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Victor. And thanks to all for inviting me here and for taking time out of your day to hear this presentation and take part in this conversation. I'm really looking forward to what you all have to say. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see my PowerPoint, um, and hopefully also a bit of the people that you can talk to. So let's see, hold on. Okay. Is that working? Great.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So I am speaking to you from Oakland, California, which is close to the beating heart of Silicon Valley and the AI hype machine. It's 7 a.m. here. Um, Thanks to all for inviting me. I'm very impressed by the Patient Revolution and its global community dedicated to care as a human activity. And I share your goals. And a good part of The Last Human Job is about chronicling the impact of industrial logics on care and connection. Today, I've been asked to address two primary questions. Can AI be expected to be capable of connective labor? Can institutions create conditions favorable to connective labor? So first, what is connective labor? Victor gave us a brief synopsis. I'm going to give you a little more. In the research for my book, I was lucky to follow around a hospital chaplain named Erin, and I'm watching her as she prayed and she sang with her patients. She was a tall, middle-aged white woman, and had a very direct but kindly manner. And she was once called to help with a patient whom I call Hiram, who had been intubated, even though he did not want to be intubated, and he was, feeling rage about being intubated, even though doctors had told him he had to be intubated or he might pass, he might die. So she was just sitting there with him, trying to be with him, reading his body signals, and he was full of anger and screaming, why, through his tube. And she was saying she was telling me about this, and she said he couldn't really write because he was on too many pain meds. And at that moment, she grabs a box of Kleenex and hands it to him and tells him to throw it against the wall, and that doing so would make him feel better. And then she tells me she reached out her hand and she says, I thought he was going to hold my hand. And he ended up grabbing me by the arm and pulling me in and holding on to me for 15 minutes. And she said the moment was powerful for both Hiram and her. And the next time she saw him, he was not intubated. And he told her, there is nothing like being in the worst moment of your life and being met with comfort by someone you don't even know when you feel like someone understands you. So, Erin's story is an example of the connection that many workers in many fields rely on to make their contribution. Clients healing, students learning, employees motivated and engaged, customers satisfied. And they all seem to require some form of empathic listening in which one gets a sense of the other person and witnessing in which one reflects that vision to the other. And most important, this process is deeply interactive, not least because for it to land successfully, the other person has to assent to some degree to the vision that's being reflected their way. And I call this work connective labor to capture this mutual achievement. And I define it as the forging of an emotional understanding of another person to create valuable outcomes. And there are particularly human characteristics to doing it well. People use their bodies as instruments, they develop their own emotional antenna, they collaborate with the other, they manage spontaneity, they make mistakes, and they recover from them. So now that you know what it is, let's take up our two questions. Can AI be expected to be capable of connective labor? And can institutions create the conditions favorable to it? And I'm basing this my answers to these questions in part on my understanding of the field and reading other people's research, but also on essentially 5 years of interviewing people who practice connective labor. I interviewed about more than 100, and people who kind of automate it or analyze it or administer it. And then, in addition, I spent more than 300 hours observing it in practice in real time. So, the first question, can AI be expected to be capable of connective labor? Well, the answer is it depends on what we value. So, the first path I'm going to take you down is like, yes, question mark. On the one hand, social emotional research has been burgeoning for the past decade, with engineers designing everything from AI couples counselors to virtual preschool. And since ChatGPT burst upon the scene, large language models have taken mechanized empathy to a new level. Chatbots have been designed to teach, provide therapy, give medical advice, and in each case, they have been celebrated by some for doing so allegedly better than humans. Although often these claims are then retracted later upon closer examination or real world conditions, although the retractions are often buried on page 32. But in the yes column, it seems clear that the human-like syntax of large language models can fool people into thinking they are seen, if only by a machine. So, a recent report on chatbot therapy is typical. On the one hand, some users complained about how the app's imperfect witnessing made them feel invisible, but others suggested that people can indeed feel seen by a bot. Said one, "This app has treated me more like a person than my family has ever done." Michael Barbaro, who is the host of the podcast The Daily, once asked ChatGPT on his show why he tended to be critical of others, and he read aloud the response. He said, "Being overly critical," this is him reading, "being overly critical can also be a sign of low self-esteem or lack of self-confidence. It may be that you are using criticism of others as a way to feel better about yourself." And at this moment, he kind of interjects and goes, "Ooh, I'm feeling seen." Or try, he's continuing to read here, or try to control a situation that you feel anxious or uncertain about. And he says, "Really seen." And when he finished reading, his guest, who was the tech journalist Kevin Roos, asked him, "How does that land?" And he says, "It lands. Yeah, I mean, it's conventional and a little rote, but it also feels like if it came out of the mouth of a relatively high-paid psychotherapist, I would take it very seriously." So the other reason why the answer might be yes, question mark, is that humans are particularly vulnerable to machines. First of all, people widely consider bots or apps as a judgment-free zone. They are routinely more honest with computers than with humans, and researchers have found this again and again. Adults will disclose more to a computer about their sexual practices before they give blood than to another human being. They'll tell a computer more about their financial troubles. And these findings recur, even though machines are not private and they're not anonymous. They definitely judge people. But for some, these kind of judgments don't feel like the moral gaze of another person. In addition, and this is more human vulnerability, humans give the benefit of the doubt to machines. So researchers have repeatedly found that if programs or robots signal any understanding or relationality in the most rudimentary way, people will approach them as if they have feelings or empathy. MIT psychologist Sherry Turkle points out roboticists have learned those few triggers that help us fool ourselves. We don't need much. We are ready to enter the romance. And then the last reason why the answer might be a qualified yes is that human practitioners can sometimes get it wrong. And the pain of judgment or shame is considerable. So, for example, a few years ago, I was talking to an engineer, Tim Bickmore, in Northeastern, and he was telling me he had created a virtual nurse. It was an AI program to help low-income patients at Boston Medical Center with discharge procedures, hoping that it would enable them to understand sometimes long and complicated instructions. And the virtual nurse, whom coders dubbed Louise or Elizabeth, was no more than an animated figure on the screen. She had a mechanized voice, and she would ask the viewers if they were Red Sox fans before going over the after hospital care plan. And Bickmore reported that 74% of his low income patients preferred a discharge AI agent, Louise, to a human nurse. And why? Because the program let them go slower than would a busy clinician. "I prefer Louise. She's better than a doctor. She explains more, and doctors are always in a hurry," one patient told Bickmore. So providers spend an average of 7 minutes with patients at discharge, while studies have shown that low literacy patients need more like an hour. The appeal of judgment-free tech is strong, particularly for disadvantaged people. But here's all the no's. The first no is that there are pretty steep individual costs. In these heady days of the proliferation of empathic chatbots, it is tempting for some to believe that machines can do the work of seeing the other and that any imperfections are kind of momentary blips on their way to being ironed out. But even beyond the very real dangers of hallucinations, errors, and privacy loss, it is true that, as therapists told me repeatedly, if people seek only to avoid the shame of the human gaze, the potential shame, say by opting for an AI companion or counselor or physician, then they might never be free of it. And perhaps that's one point, but perhaps more important, it is a core fallacy that judgment is something that we need to do away with. People seek out doctors and teachers, etc. They try to be seen by the very humans who might judge them. And actually, the power of human connective labor, kind of ironically and tragically, rests in part on the very judgment that people fear. And even technologists understand this a little bit. They understand that judgment-free automation has a cost, that of removing the power of aspiration, of someone wanting to do better. So I asked one engineer, Peter Almond, what he thought humans still had to offer in this work. And he was a true believer. He was at that moment writing code to develop an AI TA, a graduate assistant who would be grading papers for students. And this was at Stanford. And he said, I asked him, what do you think humans still have to offer here? And he said, an audience that matters. In his view, robots would someday do most everything that humans could do. In education, that included grading papers and answering questions about the material. But he still wasn't sure whether one could, and this is his language, project enough humanness onto a robot that you would want to make it proud of you. Another problem is that we have characterized human connective labor as a skill or a trait that belongs to an individual, like emotional intelligence or EQ. Instead, humans' unique contribution is instead our relationships, our connections, the social web that we create with each other. And here I'm outlining the social costs of having AI do connective labor. As Charles Cooley, the social theorist, once said, alone we are like fireworks without a match. So, in this vein, the discussion about AI has mischaracterized connective labor, relying on a kind of injection model where teaching or nursing or counseling involves me putting my expertise into you. And we can see this injection model at work in some of the conversation around ChatGPT or its inheritors. When Michael Barbaro and Kevin Roos, for example, discussed using it on that podcast, Roos said, it actually is capable of some pretty remarkable kinds of advice and guidance. And Roos reflects the injection model when he refers to therapy as simply advice or guidance. But doctors and therapists and teachers know that there is much more to this work than simply downloading information, that instead it is the relationship that matters for the positive outcomes that they look for. Reviewing a battery of randomized controlled trials, for example, medical researchers have found that the patient-clinician relationship has a detectable effect on health, an impact that they described as stronger than that of taking aspirin to ward off heart attacks. We already know that AI brings serious problems, and the most common criticisms, I give you a slew of them right here, have involved algorithmic bias, surveillance and privacy concerns, and job loss. But there is something that AI critics are not talking about. When we think of in workers as individuals, we think about how the latest chatbots might monitor or replace them. But what is at risk is more than an individual's privacy or his or her job, but instead the connections that are the mutual achievement between and among humans. And these are the unrecognized stakes of the automation of connective labor. Thus, even if bots evolve to the point of being really effective mirrors, what is missing when it is a bot that sees us is all the problems and benefits of relationships, the unpredictability, the spontaneity of interacting with another human, all aspects that force us to develop flexibility and compromise, humility and adaptability. These are muscles we need to exercise. But furthermore, the very unpredictability of the other is part of the risk of connective labor that leads to its potent reward for ourselves and our communities. So without friction, I'm saying, there is no fire. The second question was, can institutions create conditions favorable to connective labor? And the example of Erin, the chaplain, also perfectly captures how we treat connective labor in the United States and actually many other countries today. In addition to her intense and meaningful spiritual care, Erin had to wander around the hospital finding computers to enter data about her work on no fewer than three separate platforms. And I watched her deal with computers that froze. I watched her choose where to work based on where the good machines were and to hunt and peck for ways to sum up what she was doing. No one was billed for her work. It was at that time a puzzle that I set out to decode. I'm showing you here, this was a cheat sheet that she had to kind of help her figure out, how to kind of measure or talk about to the computer what she was doing. And here she had to fill out a kind of standard epic form that was modified to discuss chaplain and spiritual, the chaplain's work. And then there was a third one. So she's entering all this data. Um, so the point that Erin and my subsequent research showed was that the working conditions of connective labor matter. As connective labor increases in importance and, to be sure, in labor costs, it is increasingly being subjected to new systems that try to make it more efficient, more measurable, more reproducible. This comes with enormous cost. More than 50% of physicians say they are burnt out by the data entry requirements, and about half of nurses, for example, and teachers also report experiencing high levels of job-related stress. And it's not just the workers who suffer, but the relationships that they might forge. And what I'm showing you here is maybe you've seen it before. It was from JAMA in 2012. This is a 7-year-old's depiction of her visit to the doctor, and everyone's smiling. It's not meant to be intensely critical, but you can see that in the center. I don't really have a pointer. Not sure if you can see it, but in the center is the, child, the mother, maybe her baby sister, and the doctor is not facing them, and it's just at his computer, if you can see that. Um, so it's not just the workers who suffer, but also the relationship, and this is, I think, an example of that. Furthermore, when efficiency campaigns exert productivity pressures, we know from research that conditions encourage people to cut corners on relationship building, resorting to shortcuts and stereotypes. So practitioners are often rushed or overloaded in settings that serve low-income people in particular, who do not get the kind of artisanal connective labor that affluent people make sure to secure for themselves. Studies of physicians have shown that time pressure, patient load, and overcrowding exacerbate implicit racial bias, for example, making it more consequential in their decision making. So we know that settings shape connective labor. Can institutions create conditions that are favorable? The main point, I think, here is to make it sustainable because so many organizations take connective work for granted, and in doing so, rely on their employees to serve as kind of individual heroes, to fit it in on their own time, to respond to many data collection imperatives and efficiency dictates without making space for relationship. So I think in my research, I would say the answer is, a qualified yes. I found, first of all, that organizations have a social architecture that can impede or encourage connective labor, and it includes three vital components: a connective culture, relational design, and its resource distribution. So a connective culture is, the shared values and practices and rituals that serve to bind individuals together. And I can have examples of all three of these. Relational design, I mean the ways that people are put into relationship with each other, such as through leadership and mentors and peer groups acting as sounding boards. So I'm going to spend 1 second on sounding boards because I think that might be kind of least well known for this group of what I mean there. Sounding boards allow professionals, not just students, to be vulnerable in front of each other, to process difficult moments aloud, to learn about alternative approaches. And workers without sounding boards were on their own, serving maybe as the individual hero, but without the support that could make their paths sustainable. And I got this idea, or kind of uh, this idea emerged from my work because from my research because I saw people uh, in various situations kind of finding their way to sounding boards. And in some industries, some professions do this, kind of purposefully, therapists and teachers, et cetera, but not everybody. So I wanted to kind of highlight the necessity of it for those occupations that don't do it. The chaplains were a good example of this. They had the most occasions for this kind of exchange. They had formal presentations and feedback, and then they also had like ad hoc processing of moments. And I watched many instances where they kind of shared struggles to derive guidance or comfort. They gathered regularly to listen to each other. They sat around a conference table. One chaplain had even spent one meeting coding the way the group interacted, keeping track of critique, support, conflict, and response. And she wrote it all down, and I have a copy of that. And when the chaplains talked about the community they were building, their supervisor, Anne, warned them, I watched her do this, that they may not have the same kind of community in their future jobs that they had forged in their training. And she said, it's hard when and if you move into chaplaincy, it's impossible to rebuild a place like this, a community like this, people who understand what you're doing on a daily basis. Your family can't do it, and it's not their role for you to sit them down and say, this is what happened last night. It's important to find people who can hear you and understand. So sounding boards were forms of kind of institutionalized witnessing. But it all starts with the third component of the social architecture, which is material resources. And the resources that matter start with the time that an organization allows for a given interaction, but also includes the ratios of worker to client, the cognitive load, the extent of technology, the data use, any of those material conditions that underlie and shape people's connection. And in the book, I describe in detail the example of a clinic that gave patients lengthy appointments, accompanied their patients to specialists, and prioritized relationships as part of what needed healing. So ultimately, organizations offering a supportive social architecture take attention seriously. Not only does that mean limiting how much a worker has to attend to, it also means treating that attention as if it is precious, a unique catalyst for impact. Furthermore, these settings do not eschew all technology or systems, but they manage to make, templates and standards and data needs feel meaningful, incorporating them within and subordinating them to their mandate of connecting. So systems and standardization can be part of the material resources that contribute to a supportive social architecture. So connective labor practitioners have long faced the problem of its invisibility. We celebrate people who start huge companies or invent machines, but many of those who are truly remarkable in a clinic or classroom labor in relative obscurity. And this affects more than just someone's pay or celebrity. It means it is difficult, but not impossible, but difficult to identify who is having these profound impacts, to learn from them, to improve outcomes. This is a symptom of the invisibility of this work, its inaccessibility to measurement, which has also allowed it to avoid many attempts to date to control and commodify it. The problem of invisibility is actually yesterday's problem, however, although many are still dealing with its effects, lacking the support and training and time to do their connective labor well. What is today's problem? Today's problem is perhaps one of too much visibility in an age of automation when engineers target what they think connective labor does. And because they adhere to the injection model, they miss the importance of relationship for its profound effects. But even if machines were to do connective labor well, why would we want them to? Among the myriad human activities that we might be freed up from, it is not clear why we would automate meaningful relationships that create dignity, purpose, and understanding. In this freewheeling era of so little regulation, when the tech industry fights back every criticism with accusations of being against progress, it can be difficult to differentiate between what is valuable and what is not in the field. But we can commend some uses of new technology while discouraging others. We can call for AI transparency so people know when they are interacting with a bot instead of a human being. We can implement a connection criterion in which we evaluate technology by how much it impedes or encourages enabling human relationships. We can cautiously welcome AI that allows people to practice for human interaction or that mechanizes drudgery. We can also use this moment of too much visibility when people are noticing that connective labor exists, enough to spend billions automating it, to shift its working conditions. I've heard Victor call for a social movement, a global movement for care. If there is ever a time in which that is necessary, it is now to counter the automation of connective labor and prioritize what humans do for each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Allison. I'm waiting to see if I saw Victor on the move and just waiting to see if he's going to pipe up. But for the moment, I'll say thank you for that. And thank you for the call to action. That's a mic drop at the end. We can all we can all go back to our efforts to further the movement now with that inspirational commentary that you made. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so in a group conversation. And then we're going to separate everybody into small groups because we think there's value certainly in both and all of us learning from one another in a collective, but then also giving people a chance to talk to three or four others who are on this call randomly assigned. With the author in the room, I open it up for people to ask questions and offer their own perspective so that Allison can respond directly.
Yeah, and if you're online, just raise your hand and we'll point at you. But I'll start here in the room. I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions.
I have a question. So I'm thinking about our undercared for chronic suffering work. So this is specifically patients who are living with conditions or symptoms that are difficult to diagnose and or treat in sort of the traditional medical model or industrialized healthcare. And so I'm thinking about the automation aspect because what we learn from studying conversations in clinical encounters from these patients and their clinicians was that oftentimes there was a continual need to prove the believability of their symptoms, which, you know, when they were met with clinicians who could do that connective labor and believe them even when there was not great scientific evidence to surround the conversation. I'm just wondering, there seems to be an opportunity to either make that situation worse or better with automation technologies. And I think if we automate conversations such that they are biased in the same way that many of the other conversations are already happening, then we make that problem worse. Versus if we say, hey, there is this specific type of treatment burden that this patient population may encounter. Can we build that more into the different systems so that maybe it actually brings some visibility to that and patients don't have to do that connective labor as much in their encounters. So just some reflections and would love to hear your thoughts on that, Allison?
Sure. Thanks for that question. It strikes home. A very close friend of mine has an invisible disability and has for, 40 years, and the believability is an issue. So I hear about that a lot and understand the kind of, intense frustration and self-doubt and kind of tragic. Yeah, I really get that question. Um, I agree that I see kind of the potential for good and bad here, but I don't know whether it's temperamental or just my research, but I feel a little more worried about the bad because actually, the large language model chatbot, they tend to reflect, as your question suggested, what's out there already. So they're not that good at um, what they really are is a summation of it's a probabilistic model. It's a summation of what's out there. So if there's a lot of uh, unbelieving, that's kind of what they're gonna reflect. Now, the counter to that is that they've been designed apparently to be more, I mean, critics have called it sycophantic, more kind of complimentary or something to the person interacting with them. So that would suggest they would be less critical. And so maybe that would help the patient feel more seen or more believed. But just in terms of what they reflect back about medically, my sense is that they would not be able to sift through the the propensity of human clinicians to disbelieve. I just don't think that that's a good path. I think the I often get asked in talks like, "What's the positive use case?" And this is because my talks can end up so kind of critical or negative about it, I think. And so, like I was at MIT, the kind of belly of the beast, one might say. And at MIT, they were like, what's the positive use case? And I think one positive use case, is to support the human clinician and in this. So if we're thinking like, if you can prompt the AI to prompt the human to, kind of think more to offer more credibility to the other and to not opt immediately for the disbelieving or the doubt, that would maybe help. We've seen, yeah, maybe I'll end there. I agree that this is a major problem and that I see the propensity for good and bad. And I'm thinking about ways to produce a positive use case because people keep asking me to do that.
We're going to go to Janice now, but before that, Allison, there is a one limitation that you have personally is that you believe in people. And I think that one of the difficulties with in this space is that many of the developers of this
Mhm.
technological push profoundly dislike other humans, profoundly
Yes.
disrespect
I
what
mean, it's
humans
really
can do,
true.
right? And so when you think about the situation Casey was describing, you can easily bring to mind a bunch of clinicians acting as complete jerks and disregarding, disrespecting, disconnecting. And then the immediate solution is, oh, humans suck. I have a bot here that will never suck, right? And therefore it's better because humans are hopeless, right? And so
Hmm.
I suspect that some of the one key limitation that you have is that you kind of like other people.
That I agree, and thank you, Victor, for I agree with that limitation. I would also say something that I've noticed in hearing from people about the book, et cetera, is that misrecognition or the sense when you're practitioner or whomever you're interacting with doesn't see you is really powerful and terrible. And people do not forget it. So it almost feels like they're haunted by those moments. And it's almost like being misrecognized has more impact. I can't say more because I'm not sure, but it has a very powerful impact, and I wonder whether it has more of an impact than being seen, or it's just people really remember it. So it's made for some effective, some fertile ground for the technologists to take advantage of those feelings and then sell computers as something that won't judge you.
Yeah. Janice.
Yeah, thank you. This was really exciting, and I'm working a little bit with AI and patient partnering and patient portals and uh, places like a bridge, the translators. I just want to say, as a patient, I come from the patient partner perspective, and I have had multiple misdiagnoses, sometimes more serious than others. But one time, I just quick on about it was about my foot, and I was having a lot of problems. And anyway, I was misdiagnosed, I think with gout or something, and the doctor actually sent me down to purchase shoes at a well-known shoe store, old shoe store here in Seattle, and that he could help me buy shoes. And when he heard what my symptoms were, he goes, "You have plantar fasciitis." Sure enough, I looked it up and he was right, right? And I did go back to my doctor. My point being, just said, "Thank you for sending me there." And he actually correctly diagnosed me and it did help. I didn't need the shoes. He said, just get some inserts and whatever, you'll be fine. And stop walking a other simple stuff. So my issue is, I trusted my doctors fully, and I have known other times where they didn't quite diagnose me. One time I was diagnosed with prostate. I'm a female, and so I wrote back, no, that's not mine. This was my primary care doctor, right, who I've known for a decade and I loved. So he goes, oops, I posted the wrong thing in there. And so my point being is there comes a time where, I mean, honestly, there's some patients that might not know that, right? And so they trust their doctor or they don't trust them. So, in those experiences of mine, I didn't have to for the prostate, but I actually did go to the computer, in the last 10 years, go to Google or whatever. But it's because I have some medical understanding, was able to, ensure that I was right and would have back and forth with my doctor. But the thing is something you mentioned about how, sometimes human connection, people don't connect with, their clinician, or the clinician doesn't connect with the patient. It's just human nature. And I had that experience recently, and I did ask for another clinician just because, actually, counter to your discussion about slow speed, I'm pretty fast speed, and she was a little bit too slow for me. And so, what I'm trying to say is, what they have taught, and she maybe wasn't as affirming as I was expecting of my concerns. And so recently, and the conversation AI agents, I just found out that name a couple days ago, that people are now using when you call up and or you write in messaging and how they write back. And somebody I know actually went to their clinic and went to meet the person that they had been responding to her or him, and they didn't answer. Right. Well, she found out later there wasn't that person. It was an AI bot. And because she wanted to compliment them on how she had not been treated previously. So there's something to think there. But and another thing I just want to add about attitudes, if you like, I get mad sometimes. I don't use AI very often, but I almost want to yell at it, right? When it's taking too long to answer my question, my prompts aren't proper enough. And so if you are mean to an AI bot, I wonder if it will teach because it's designed for you, if it will treat you the same way going back or always be nice. And what you think about.
Thanks for the question. I want to say two things to that. The first is your point about, the kind of imperfect treatment by human clinicians. That's for sure a fact of life. It exists out there. I would say something that I think we ignore at our peril is that these human clinicians work in particular conditions that generate that kind of that are that kind of encourage kind of rushed or stereotyping or, kind of dismissive interactions. Like it's not, it's not that it's important to think about the conditions that produce those behaviors. And uh, it's kind of an unfair comparison, I think, when we're like, oh my God, these AIs are so kind and polite, and humans just are, just trying to get through the day. And, it's like there's a reason. And I'm trying to kind of shine the light on those working conditions. So that's the first thing. Will the AI treat you as mean as you treat it? I suspect not, but that also depends on just how it's been trained. And often AI reflects what it's been coded for. And so engineers can code it to be like to respond to the way you treat it. So it can be done. It's it's more likely that it would retain a polite, a kind of more professional um, response, but that's going to vary based on the agent. Thanks.
Thanks, Alison. Juan Pablo.
Yeah, thank you, Victor and Alison. Wonderful presentation. I'm one of the members of the group of the care unit. I'm leading many people in the call artificial intelligence projects. I'm also a clinician. Victor characterized you as believer in humans and believer in humans and AI. So that perhaps presents my label because I don't think the problem is AI. I don't think it's an issue of technology. I think it's an issue of how the technology and for which purpose is developed. So it is the
Hmm.
architecture, is the motive, is the culture, is the system in which the AI is created and for what goals is created. That is the problem.
Hmm.
So that to some extent is what we're seeing.
Hmm.
Efficiency, seeing more patients, seeing in a way that we can charge them more, that kind of stuff. But if you imagine AI as a way to support care, AI might become a fantastic partner in relationship building. And I think the researchers like the ones on the table should be aiming at educating other AI researchers and clinicians that AI can certainly help. Examples of that is disappearing from the encounter. So what if an encounter doesn't have a computer? What if an encounter just have two humans connecting, but doesn't have anything distracting them? No pagers, no phones, but just the clinician there, doing what they do best. So what if we imagine a world in which the human interaction is the ultimate goal of AI? Our group is trying to move those initiatives forward, but one of the things that is a challenge is that I think the AI with the knowledge-based approach triggered an important question, which is knowledge is the most important thing in interaction for many of these people. And when we say no, they say, okay, so what is it? And we say many things. And then say, okay, how do you measure it? If
Uh-huh.
the knowledge is not a problem, so what is really relationship? What is really a good interaction? And we face with the problem is it is something that we can or should even be measured. And if not, or yes, how we actually move forward so initiatives to say that AI has an impact or not in these kind of processes in relationship building and interaction. So again, appreciate the presentation. I think it resonates with a lot of the work that we're doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I found myself nodding, agreeing, following you. And at the end, I go to myself, those are contradictory. So it's funny because I agree with everything you were saying. And at the same time, we are finding ourselves trapped in a kind of almost oxymoronic or contradictory situation, by which I mean this. You started out saying, oh, the problem is not AI. The problem is how it is designed, and it needs to be designed to support relationship. And by the end, you were saying they can't measure relationship, so they can't fix their design. And I just want to point out two things. While I agree with both of those statements, um, two problems, which is AI requires us that we measure. And and so if we think, as I found in my book and write in my book, if we think that there are kind of things that happen beyond measurement between two people in a relationship, then AI, there's a kind of inherent problem with how AI can support relationship. I want to qualify what I just said, but I'm going to put that out there that there are these inherent problems. I understand that any engineer who's listening will be like, there is nothing beyond measurement. I often had that experience when I was talking to them in Silicon Valley. They'd be like, we just haven't learned how to measure it yet. And they'd be like, your eyes dilate when you feel whatever, like they think it's just a matter of time before we can measure appropriately. To that, I say, psychologists actually have moved beyond the facial recognition kind of tenets that the engineers apply in their work. Psychologists no longer think that there is a universal facial expression for happiness and sadness. Like they have sufficiently incorporated cross-cultural information to show that actually a smile here means something different from a smile here or there, and there is not a universal. So that poses a central problem for engineers wanting to just kind of be like, we can measure it all. So that's point one. But I want to kind of, so that's kind of on an abstract level, how I was interacting with what you said. But I also think that your core point about how we just need to kind of show them the path, help them make this useful. And I also want to, here I'm going to bring in some sociological kind of critique there and be like, but they're not just doing it to make a better world. They're doing it to sell product, and they're doing it at the behest of a 1 billion-dollar industry. And so who's at the wheel is not the, and this was really what you were saying, who's at the wheel, who's at the design table are really not people who are focused on relationship. And here we're merging with what Victor says, and these people don't like people enough. That's a very negative view. There are going to be, kind of people who, kind of want to foster relationship, and I want to support them. And I'm going to touch just on your first point to say I read today an interview with Sam Altman talking about the elimination of screens that are the way we interact with, LLMs, et cetera, today is kind of clumsy dealing with our computers. We put in prompts and then we apply the AI somewhere else, or, we have our phones, and he wants a kind of screenless, more seamless approach to incorporating an AI agent. And I think that is closer to the vision that you were discussing and could be more positive because you wouldn't see the drama cartoon by the 7-year-old. Um, but that's a future that is also a little scary because, as you say, the people who are designing this are not thinking relationship first. Thank you.
So that suggests that the scope of the movement for care,
Mhm.
not only does it need to take over the organizations of healthcare, but it needs to take over the technologies that are
Mhm.
that show up in healthcare,
Absolutely.
and make sure that those who are like Juan Pablo committed to connective care and connective labor and care are at the wheel.
Yeah.
At the same time, recognizing or wishing all of us good luck because we are not only being recorded here, but probably there is some agent that is already collecting our faces, and through our faces, our bios, and we're going to start getting email advertisement about all sorts of things to improve our relationships, and that's all going to start coming up to us. So, in other words, we are at a massive disadvantage in the face of people that have unprecedented knowledge about us and unprecedented power to change our behaviors
Hmm.
through the concentration of the means of computation.
Hmm.
So it's a formidable um, uh, it is a formidable enemy, I guess, if one were to put it that way. There's inspiration in science fiction, and there is a series of books by Becky Chambers, in which the AI grows so intelligent that it doesn't destroy the human, but rather decides to retreat, having recognized that humans have stopped flourishing because computers have
Mm.
taken over all of these relational and other things that make us human. The computers, the robots, decide to go to the forest and let the humans be humans again. And as the humans reflourish by being humans, they send a robot scout back to humanity to figure out what do they really need from us. And I think that is a very interesting frame, which is, humans are
Yeah.
trying to do things better for humans. Uh, and the question that the computers ought to be asking for themselves, if they were to have, independent cognition and so forth, is how might we be helpful to you in fostering your flourishing? And that is not a question that these systems and their engineers are asking. They're asking, what can the computer do? Let's do it, and damn the torpedo.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree with that framing. That is all, it's almost like an abstract, like joyride for them with enormous implications for the rest of us.
Yes, Ron.
Good morning. Thanks, Allison. That was wonderful. Look
Thank you,
forward to
Ron.
reading the book. Um, you kind of like I'm following this narrative as these questions go on, and I kind of started with one question, but I guess my question now would be, what's our product? I'm a surgeon of 30 years, and around me, I've heard forever about working and pointing to this person or that person and saying he or she is a highly productive surgeon. And I would always stop and ask, okay, great, what's our product? If our product is to churn out number of cases done and billables and things like that, then yes, they're highly productive. But did they stop and did they take the time to spend with their patients to give them what they wanted and not necessarily what the billing department likes? And to me, and I've said this before in some of these meetings, is that the currency of medicine is not dollars, it's time.
Hmm.
Um, and we use the term we spend time. We spend time in various ways. And as you said earlier in the talk, we should spend our time figuring out what our patients need and what our patients want from us, because that is our product. In this universe, the product, AI product, is
Hmm.
really us. It is our information, it's our details, and they are, we become the product
Hmm.
rather than what our needs are, what our desires are. So, with that being said, I'll just kind of switch back to talk about the invisible disability. And in my practice, I evolved to understand that some of my patients came in with some kind of symptomatology that didn't make sense and so forth and
Hmm.
so on, and kept going and going. And it turned out at the root of it was trauma. Um,
Hmm.
are the AI models going to be able to pick up the teenage girl who keeps
Hmm.
coming back to the clinic with these vague complaints or cutting and so forth and so on, and come up with the concept that it kind of relates to when Uncle Kenny moved in a year ago? I mean, so
Hmm.
this is my question: is AI going to be able to pick up the subtleties, the nuances? Do you see any evidence that that's something that is being introduced?
Hmm. I do not. Um, Partly because in my experience, in my research, I was lucky enough to find a clinic that really targeted people like that, where they had been failed by medicine before, or perceived that they had been failed by medicine before, and were frequent users of the ER and had like many diagnoses. And uh, the leader of the clinic, the founder of the clinic, was this charismatic guy who was like, what these people need is a massive dose of relationship. And that was what he designed the entire clinic to be about. And he had, all these charts all over the wall documenting how it worked, how people in this intense relationship environment actually then didn't go to the ER, had more successful health outcomes, et cetera. So I think what you're describing is a situation where these people need a massive dose of relationship. And so will AI effectively diagnose that when it can't provide that? I'm not sure. I, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, as someone who started and ran for years in the latter part of my surgical career, I ran a chronic pain clinic for kids
Hmm.
because what I learned was that, as deep as your knife can reach, it can't reach angst and it can't reach some of these pains that are unreachable. And
Hmm.
that is exactly how we modeled our clinic, was that it was all about kind of wraparound and relationships. And during the pandemic, we would sneak them into the buildings where the clinics were closed because we needed the patients to have that feeling of
Hmm.
face-to-face, contact. And
Hmm.
AI, I don't believe will ever be able to touch that.
Right. I mean, I've seen that already with the social media folks talking about loneliness. Loneliness actually, I don't think is the problem. Or there is loneliness, and loneliness affects many people and has serious well-being effects, health effects, but it's not actually there's not more loneliness than before. And I think that they talk about loneliness because they think they can solve loneliness with these kind of putative social connections that you can get online. And actually, I call it a depersonalization crisis, and think kind of feeling like a number and having mass standardization experiences and also having a lot of screen time is what's producing this sense of alienation, and that's not solvable by more social media. So anyway, yeah, I do think that will it diagnose something it can't solve? That's a great question.
We are at a crossroads here. So we have a couple of questions online. We have a question in the room here. We have 20 more minutes. I know that the group had planned the breakout sessions, and it occurs to me that this is a very good conversation that we're having with the Q&A. So I'm gonna be democratic. Seems like it's the thing that's missing these days. So let's try it out. And what I would suggest that we do is uh, maybe do with permission from Maggie and Sheila, maybe do a bit of a show of hands. Who would like to use the next 20 minutes to continue in the Q&A? And the second option is, no, let's break into smaller groups and have discussions among ourselves so that we also get to know each other. And so, yeah, do a little relationship building, since that seems to be a key topic here. So a bit of a show, you have to turn on your screens or you can use your hand thing. Um, uh, uh, Show of hands, who would like to continue on with the Q&A and not break into smaller groups? And you guys get to vote.
Will we get
Yeah. Are we one hand or? No, you're multiple hands, and I see the Care Lab people in Barcelona are multiple hands as well. There you go. They're actually two hands. Okay, and then bring your hands down. That's very nice. Thank you very much for playing. Yeah, who would like to break into small groups? Raise your hand. Okay, I think we have pretty obvious response. So again, Maggie and Sheila, with your permission, let's continue with the Q&A. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. So let's go with Anita and then Ian here, and then we go to Gabriela. Anita.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Allison. This was really enlightening. All of you, what you have mentioned, I'm working on through I founded a company called Twin Weavers, and Twin is, trying to create something like eventually a digital twin model that for the individual. So it's really evolving, trying to get a personal assistant into a digital twin. So I totally appreciate that the problem of the conventional agentic AI, which is, they have data that they're working with, but they're not the people that we're focusing on, the underrepresented population, there's no data available. So there's a lot of hallucination, a lot of algorithmic bias. So we're collecting the data right from the individual, just talking to individual and addressing their health and social needs. And I just learned from this presentation that as we are speaking to the individual, while we're learning all the nuances and their challenges and their inner strength, is to guide them into developing a relationship. The reason why we could do that is that we're working with human intelligence. You really can't have good artificial intelligence without the human intelligence. So we have a team of cognitive scientists, data scientists, medical anthropologists, and they're going to be supervising the chatbot. So we don't have any screen. It's all through a telephone. So I would love to engage with you, at some other time, because I think you have a lot of wisdom that can help us build this product. And we're starting, with small ethnic groups, right? So it's African Americans in urban settings, Native Americans in Oklahoma, Native Hawaiians. So we just really want to learn not just the LLM, but the vernacular and their cultural belief and their personal belief. So that's where we at. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Anita. I didn't quite hear a question, but I'm interested in what you have to say. I have such ambivalence. I don't want marginalized populations left out of the future, but I also am quite cautious about the utilization of these technologies. And in particular, I have this kind of approach that I developed when I wrote about AI in the book about how it's sold to us as better, better than nothing, better than humans, or better together, in the kind of we can work together and make things better. And all three of those are applying kind of to different populations. And the better than nothing is often what's applied to dealing with marginalized populations. I don't hear that in what you're saying, so I'm interested and I'll look forward to a future conversation.
I don't think it's going to be better than a human. I think
Mhm.
it's a way to kind of to bridge that gap for the moment, and then
Mhm.
eventually the data insight that we get from these different population could be shared with healthcare providers.
Mhm.
This is the effect we get, and this is the kind of communication. These are the burden, and I'm just going to throw really quickly one example. There was a woman who was referred to me because she was getting evicted, and she has cancer. She had an 18-month-old child, so she went to the hospital to try to get a voucher, housing voucher that increased the amount so she can pay her rent because she's no longer working. So she's entitled for a higher amount. She went to the social worker at the hospital where she was getting her chemotherapy treatment. Social worker gave her some forms to fill out. She said to the social worker, "I can't read and write." The social worker's response is, "Look up the word, Google the words you don't understand."
Wow.
She got
Yeah.
evicted.
Oh, that's a terrible story. Thank you for your work.
Thank
Um,
you.
uh, Thanks, Anita. Ian,
This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
in the room here, Allison.
Okay, thank you.
Um, my thought was initially grew out of what I thought was an excellent question from Ron around what is the product, and it's an interesting question. As the designer, that's a question that's on my mind too. The answer that I'm interested in is action as a product, and so what I mean here is. I feel like that's the hidden wheel in a way is AI's ability to understand action, what's happening in action. And and so when your stories are all stories of action, which really struck me. So the throwing of boxes of Kleenex, the gripping of hands, the fire and the friction, the Louise going slower. It's the differences in the quality of the action, the being seen. It's not just that. I mean, I could take a pill to be seen, but that's not the point. It's in the action, the drama of what's going on, and the engagement with medicine, and I feel like that those relationships build in those actions. Without that there, I don't know that you have the connection, that being caught up and wrapped up in what's going on. And maybe AIs are paying attention to the effects of action, so the sense of people report satisfaction or being seen and the like, but the actual what's at stake in getting there and the risk of getting there I is where I feel like the struggle is. So for example, I would hate to see the success of AI measured in the number of boxes of Kleenex thrown. it's it's really that only makes sense in that context, and the ability to participate and put oneself at risk in those sorts of contexts that is a crucial element.
Thank you for that question, which really,
Question, but
or comment, which really appeals to me as a sociologist. I'll tell you why. I think I disagree with you.
yeah, I'd love to
Well,
hear.
well, this is the issue, is that I agree that the stories I told have action in them, the Kleenex, the gripping, I agree with all that. But I think what you're hearing or what you're noticing is that I have to collect data, and data is what is visible. And I have my own measurement issue as a ethnographer that
Sure.
is that is shared by the survey researcher and frankly the AI engineer. And I'm trying to convey something, the power of connective labor. And I am using whatever tools that I can of observation and kind of evidentiary proof. And that
Sure.
evidence is the action. And so yes, I'm kind of that. Yes, that's part of the story. But if you had pushed me against the wall and said, like, where is connective labor? I would say it's in the feeling of being seen. And you can't take a pill for that. And that's this kind of nebulous kind of amorphous kind of space between people that is not easily captured by ethnographers or by survey researchers or by AI engineers because we rely on evidence that needs kind of external data points that are action. So I kind of think that your question is fascinating because it gets right at the problem that I share with the people I'm criticizing, which is the need for this proof. I'll say one more thing, which is something I stumbled upon in my research was that neurologists, neuroscientists are looking for the same thing, that there is a branch of neuroscience that is actually kind of self-critical that says, we rely too much on the individual and the MRI, and, actually we need to be able to talk about what happens between people. And they've developed some really interesting experiments that are beyond me, essentially, where they put people in two different rooms and have them on computer and try and measure whether they can see each other or detect each other in the computer interaction. And I almost don't understand it, but I'm very interested in the fact that they have a whole branch of neuroscience called second person neuroscience, trying to capture what happens between people. And I would, maybe if we expand the word what action means, but I think what we're all trying to capture is ephemera, is what happens in the air between people. And would not necessarily call that action.
I, yeah, I think it's what is the scope of action? So for me, it would include
Okay.
all those emotional qualities, the sense of
Okay.
what's meaningful and substantive and what's happening. So it's definitely not what is
Okay.
happening, it's the substance and why it matters and what's at stake and how the resolution and flow of those tensions and the emotions that are caught up into it. I think reducing action to what is happening is
Uh-huh.
something that AI could work with, but it can't
Uh-huh.
understand the substance of what's happening, is where I think. And so when the chaplain is having their armed grip, they're
Yeah.
not calling security because they can
Because they
appreciate
get
the
the meaning.
substance of what's
Yes.
going on there, even if they don't understand fully until later.
Yeah.
The I
Very
had a
interesting.
I had a chance to visit the a new hospital floor at a very modern ward in a top hospital, and the patient faced a massive TV screen in front of the bed, and behind the TV screen are a number of cameras and that are purportedly focused on capturing what is going on in the room.
Mhm.
And I would have thought that the moment the patient grabbed that chaplain's hand, security would automatically be called because it will be coded as a threat,
Mhm.
right? Because they would not understand what is the nature of
Mm-hmm.
that contact.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, this is there are there it it's interpretive. I so there is something we should come up with some name. Maybe it is maybe connective labor is one aspect of it or is the thing, but I we are all grasping at this thing that is in between us.
Mm-hmm.
I use my hands to describe it, and a colleague said it looks like you're milking a very small cow, and and but it is this thing in between us that
Mm-hmm.
is we know it, we feel it, we recognize it. It gets closer, it gets tighter when things go well. You can feel it break when
Mm-hmm.
we enter into a discussion or into a rupture, into a disruption in the relationship. You can physically feel it break. And in our group, we've been fascinated, although we haven't really engaged with it. We studied shared decision making, but we're heavily influenced by the work of thinking of this being two brains that are making decisions that are connected only through communication versus thinking of two brains that are making a social decision, a socially constructed decision, even if it's just the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that our cognition evolved socially would make
Mm-hmm.
us more likely to think that our brains work at its best when we work together, as in
Mm-hmm.
juries in at a courtroom, for instance. And on
Mm-hmm.
that note, we're happy to have Maggie here, that should be on jury duty, but actually is here. So Maggie, you have the next question.
Well, this is it. Ian's question just got me thinking, and Allison, your response is, I'm always so curious why there's such resistance to asking, asking the patients and the clinicians in kind of our context, or um, if they felt cared for, if they felt they were able to care for this person, or whatever that kind of language might be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to me because I think this, lean towards the idea that it has to be observable from outside,
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
puts a requirement on it that may
Yeah.
be limiting the ability to understand it and therefore value it
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
kind of reward it. Because I really think, I mean, from our course and from other things, I really think if you just asked people at the end of each
Mm-hmm.
visit, did you feel cared for? Do you feel cared for? Do you feel that you were able to care for this person? Their responses would tell us a lot about that environment and what kind of settings and conditions for care really are potentially helping it thrive. But there's
Mm-hmm.
so much resistance to that.
So I love that point because I have two things to say to that. First is psychologists have a kind of gone down this path, and they've come to think that there's this great article that I read that talked about how perspective, um, it's like perspective taking versus perspective asking, something like that. It's either taking or getting. Anyway, the point that they're making is don't just assume that you can read the other person. You should be also asking them. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is what you're really talking about is the kind of paradigm of objectivity and the discomfort that science and the Enlightenment and maybe our society has with actually people's opinions of their own experience. And my favorite example of like kind of the perverse ends to which the kind of search for objectivity has gone is that physicists, who are, of course, the kind of most allergic to subjectivity and most wedded to objectivity. Actually, there's been a recent, I want to say within the last 10 years, study where they used light from stars billions of years away to make a decision to decide something in a study. Like they were so afraid of having a human being kind of like, kind of pollute the study that they were like, we're going to let light decide. It was just felt very antithetical to the work that I do, which is really about asking people. Um, yeah, that's all I'm going to say. I agree
Sounds
with
like
what
the
your point.
Sounds like the physicists that were doing the horoscope. Gabriela, I realized that I skipped you, but I thought you had dropped your hand and then lifted it again. So should we go with you or with Kristen?
No, Gabriella, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabriela. I'm coming in from El Salvador in Central America. I'm a healthcare consultant and always grateful to TPR for the space and the learning platform. It's really, amazing, always refreshing, enriching. And Allison, your work is brings so much value to our daily endeavors. And all of your contributions are just so relatable. I'm currently working on a project on assisted living, and there's a lot of noise around how they need to make this uh, profitable in order or sustainable at least, and is there any space for efficiencies using AI and this sort of language and trying to introduce things to make this possible. So what I've found is, obviously assisted living is a scenario where connective labor is paramount, right? People that are there are lonely, and what they really need is human relationships, and on the other hand, they kind of resist, anything that 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 would need new learning, especially technology, because it's not uh, a good fit for the elderly and people who need this kind of help. So some of the things we've introduced are very, basic, and of course they're understaffed, and they need to kind of stretch the time for the people that work there, and I'm so what Ron said about the currency in medicine and care not being dollars but time, so
Hmm.
one of the things that we've done is some of the people that live there prefer Nurse Maria, or they prefer Dr. Juan or whoever, so uh, just simple stuff such as creating avatars and reading them nighttime stories or books with an avatar reading it, or just on a video, and this sort of stuff. I've always been a measuring measurability Robocop, and this is what I do, and all the things that I consult in is, if you can't measure it, then there's a problem, right? But in this scenario, I've found, kind of letting my guard down, and just, you measure this by by seeing the reaction of the people that you're introducing this technology to. And in this case, it's been, so rewarding because we don't have KPIs for this, but you know, people are super happy because they get to spend more time. And of course, they know that they're being read to by an avatar, but it's, it's part of them learning of this new technology and but still having more time to interact with the people that they have built rapport and a relationship with. I really do think that, again, AI is not the problem. The problem is how you can bring it in and not create friction and not create barriers, but rather, embrace all of the great, rewards that it can bring, and still manage to kind of hit some of the key bottom lines of efficiency and profitability or whatever. I mostly work on the business side of healthcare, so there's a really, balance that you need to keep in order to make it profitable and make it sustainable, but not lose the humanity of it. So all of this is really, refreshing and I can relate to this a lot. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriela. Your comment really highlights a central issue, is that technology, um, doesn't have its own impact. It's not, you know, it's not inevitable what it does. It enters into our social world the way we have it set up. And it accentuates and amplifies existing trends that already exist, that already shape our experience. So when people talk to me about like what do I see as the future, I often say there are three futures that I see, and none of them are good. Sorry to end with a doomsaying note. The first is that the first is an inequality future where rich people get human interaction and the marginalized get bots. And the second is a triage future where the simple get the bots, and as things get more complicated, you can bump up to a human. And the third is a binary future where bots take care of the thinking and humans take care of the feeling. And all three of those futures are actually the present. We have examples of all three of those futures right now. And all three of them scare me, actually, to some degree. I think they have serious problems, all of them. With your specific example, I am glad that they derive comfort from these avatars. There's actually great work done by people who have given the robotic seal Paro to elderly, and they love it, and they report, they take care of it, and they're like, they talk to it, and they kind of project kind of and sentience onto this robotic thing. So yeah, I think humans are very vulnerable to machines. I am afraid of that vulnerability, but I also recognize that humans will derive comfort from them. So I hear your story, and it makes me worried, but also I can see how it is has positive benefits. So my ambivalence is fully present there. Thank you for your question, for your comment.
We have to, oh, Sheila, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in, Victor, and let you have the final word, but pre-final, I just want to thank everybody for all of you staying on the line this long and for this incredibly rich and dynamic conversation, and to you, Allison, for being
Thanks.
here to prompt this wonderful thinking and dialogue. And I appreciate and empathize with your sense of not doom, that's not the word you use, but pessimism about the future. but I will offer an antidote, and that is the patient revolution, as a source of hope for everybody who is on this call, everyone who stayed with us, and everybody who's been with us today. And so I'm going to make a shameless plug for your support. We have offered these town halls for free to people. We offer most of our services for free, in fact, all of them for free. And so to keep this going and to continue to grow the patient revolution as a source of hope and a better future with and without technology, we really do count on everybody's support and engagement. Beyond financial support, your participation today and beyond is incredibly important and vital to our future. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Sheila. And I want to do my part to also thank everyone. Go and Allison has done a wonderful presentation, but I think it does it just like when you watch the movie. The book is always worth reading, and so the last human job is Allison's book. Go get it, read it. It's you'll be better off because of it, and you're ending in the book calling for a movement of care. This is it, either from a research side or from a movement side. We work together. We do it in relationship. We all hope for a future of careful and kind care, not of further industrialization. And Alison, it's been very rewarding to connect with you. And thank you for taking the time this morning to be with us. And please join me in thanking Professor Pugh for a wonderful presentation.
Thanks to all of you. I really appreciate your time and the great questions. Great conversation.
Thank you, Allison.
Okay, be careful out there.